Hello and good day to all of you. Today we are meeting again with another very important topic related with the human-computer interaction subject discipline. So today's discussion will be mainly focused on interviewing and participation observation. So I think most of us are familiar with the term interview. Normally the idea of interview is it's a structured discussion which takes place between two or more individuals. In the HCI discipline as well, the interviewing is also identified as an extremely vital and significant mechanism to extract relevant user opinions or the stakeholder opinions, which will facilitate fine-tuned HCI interactions associated with the designs proposed by the HCI designers. But in order to get the fruitful outcomes from the interviews, it has to be properly planned and it has to be properly organized. So here in this slide, I would like to point out some of the salient points which is important to be considered when organizing HCI related interview sessions. First, the most important point is choose of the correct participants, because if you didn't select the relevant participants, the responses that you are getting might be totally irrelevant. It could be like some garbage. So you are wasting your time, effort, maybe money as well, and ultimately you are not getting anything at all. So how can we select the relevant participants? So as I mentioned, I am focusing these interviews to the domain of HCI, right? So with that emphasis, as you can see in the slide, current users related with the business of concerns. Now say for an example, let's try to understand this with a real world scenario. You are planning to develop a HCI interface for a pharmacy. So the one of the ideal person would be the cashier of the pharmacy or the pharmacist. Why don't you discuss with them? Why don't you capture their interaction experiences? Why don't you get the stress or the compactness that they experience during rush hours? Those would be very ideal inputs for you to properly arrange and originate the design that you are planning to propose. Further, why don't you ask the constraints or the difficulties that they are facing? So the organization might be having a legacy system, or in the sense they might be already using a system. So you can investigate on the existing system and you can collect the difficulties which are faced by them while we are interacting with that system. So the system related interaction experiences and the stakeholders cognitive aspects associated experiences, their work experiences are extremely vital to be discussed in a structured manner in form of an interview to get the required rationales. Then not only the stakeholders or the direct people who are interacting with the business of concerns, better to discuss with non-users as well. So this will provide an additional out of the box perspective. Say for an example, maybe from a customer you can ask, right? You can ask from a customer who is visiting the pharmacy, what are the difficulties that they face? Maybe the latency of service, lengthier queues are being formed, lot of congestion inside the pharmacy because the transaction time taken for one customer is too long, and maybe wrong prescriptions, wrong medications are being issued, and mixing of prescriptions, lot of problems. So it is very important to obtain a non-user's viewpoint as well, just to get a out of the box assessment of the problem of concern. Then different samples representing different groups can be interviewed. As I already mentioned, direct stakeholders who are liaising with the business operation, and indirect stakeholders like customers, then the owners of the business from their perspectives, and relevant government regulatory bodies. Likewise, you can come up with a sort of an onion model. So onion model points out the important stakeholders which are concerned with the business of concern. So then you can further brainstorm and narrow your onion model to only the significant set of stakeholders. So likewise, using multivariate mechanisms, it's extremely vital to select the most appropriate set of participants for your interview to be successful. Second point, introduce a pay scale or token of appreciation. Now, say for an example, you are going to do a research and you are going to come up with a specific interaction model or new interface design to facilitate e-governance related applications. Now, this is not a project which is given to you by a particular stakeholder with a deadline to be concluded and as an income generator for you. So this is completely an individual research. You would be directly benefiting from it. So while you are interviewing selected set of external people, why should they utilize their time on you? What is the benefit that they gain? So that is the point, that as a researcher, as the originator of the researcher, you have to think, how can you make the relevant audience of concern to be interactively engaging with you? The very good approach is just to provide a pace, unless at least you have to provide a token of appreciation for them. So that would be a booster from their perspective to effectively contribute. We are making your interview session significant and fruitful. The next important point is approximate if necessary. So this is also a very important point. Now say for an example, you might have to interview medical specialists, but their schedules are extremely busy or they are not available, and certain meetings that you have scheduled with them has been cancelled and you are in a urgency to complete your report or your research. So if you cannot meet the actual targeted personnel, approximate it. For an example, if you cannot meet the medical consultants, at least meet medical students. If you cannot meet software consultants or software engineers, at least meet software engineering students, because something is better than nothing. Further, when you are selecting people for the interviewing purpose, especially in an organizational context, say for an example, a project has been given to you where you are the HCI designer and you want to come up with some effective HCI interface designs for the organizational operational activities. So while interviewing the directly involved stakeholders, it is important to target on the people who are functioning at the middle layer of the organizational hierarchy, because the middle layer people, they have a very good understanding on what is happening at the bottom layer and what is happening at the top layers. If you directly select the top layer people, they might not have a proper idea about what is happening at the ground level, the complexities faced by the ground level people. Vice versa, if you only interview the bottom level people, they might not have a proper picture about the constraints or the requirements which need to be fulfilled, the expectancies which are to be addressed by the high level people. So the tying bond is significant at the middle level people. So it is ideal to select middle level officers as well for your interview sessions to make it even more fruitful. Yes, moving forward, when you are conducting an interview, it has to be very well planned. It has to be very well planned. If you are going to have the interview without any plan, that is going to be a huge waste, because you might be investing certain amount of money, time, traveling cost. Scheduling an appointment with the consultant might not easy. So if an opportunity is given, you have to make the maximum out of it, but you cannot do it if you have not properly done your preparation. So first point is, you have to define, or you have to come to a conclusion, what is the purpose of this interview. That is very important. Derive the purpose of your interview. So you have to brainstorm before going to the interview, individually or collectively. What is the purpose of the interview, that what are the aspects that you are planning to accomplish through the interview session, which is to be conducted tomorrow or in a few weeks time. So that homework has to be done properly. Then you have to come up with a properly defined questionnaire. Now it's not a blindly defined questionnaire we are putting questions here and there. I mentioned it is very important to come up with a purpose for your interview. So think about the purpose and align the questions in your questionnaire and map the questions in your questionnaire with the purpose to be fulfilled. That will make the questions in the questionnaire is binded with the purpose or the subsets of the purpose, linking towards the overall purpose to be fulfilled. Therefore, you are not asking irrelevant questions, and people have to answer those questions, and the responses which they are providing is also very relevant, because you have done the background mapping of questions in the questionnaire with the purposes or the subset of purposes to be addressed. So that is a very important aspect. And always try to be curious. If you are curious about certain aspect or the element under investigation, then the interviewing party will be very active in responding to you. So the maintenance of the curiosity between interviewer and interviewee is also very significant and an active ingredient resulting towards providing effective end results. Then, as the interviewer, limit your speaking. Let the interviewee speak. You elaborate your question, you fire your question to the interviewee and let him or her speak. Don't put a lot of restrictions where you might be losing a lot of important facts, where the enthusiasm towards the interviewee also might be diluted. So before commencing the interview, take prior approval to record the conversation or to jot down necessary information, necessary notes. So where you have a good platform to brainstorm when you go home. Right. So I mentioned defining a properly mapped questionnaire would be a salient point governing the flow of your interview session. So these questions in the questionnaire has to be properly mapped with the sub aspects of the purpose that you need to fulfill through the interview. So it could be purpose, we can define it as an objectives of the interviews that you plan to fulfill. Then when you are including questions to your questionnaire, prevent leading questions like, do you like to work here? Because it is very much like a biased or an induced question where you are forcing the user to answer either as yes or no. What if you ask the same question, do you have to say anything special about your working place, right? So try to limit yes no type answers, because that is not properly contributing for your brainstorming activities when you go home. Open-ended reflections would be ideal. So you have to create your questionnaire in such a way to trigger open-ended answers from the interviewee's point of view. Then ask questions related to their operational expertise or operational niche. If you take an organization like a bank, it has a lot of subdivisions functioning inside. Maybe pawning division, loan division, HR divisions, IT divisions, finance division, likewise. Don't ask finance or forecasting or pawning related questions from an IT personnel whom you have selected to interview. Make that individual also uncomfortable, and you will be getting some garbage type of irrelevant results, which is adversely hindering your information collection, where the garbage type of information provided could act as noise, where you have to utilize significant amount of time to process and remove those irrelevant facts. Further, do not give a lot of liberty when asking the questions. For an example, how often do you exercise? So, where in responding to this sort of a question, there is excessive liberty. Even a person can lie. Even they don't do exercise, even they can lie. So, try to formulate your question with a proper emphasis and cognitively think. If you are the person who is getting the question, how would you answer to that sort of a question? So, label and word your questions properly. Try to limit the excessive liberty given. Then in that aspect also, the answers that you are getting will be very relevant for the investigation that you are conducting. Right. Moving forward, the next important aspect that we are going to discuss today is the participation observation, which is the second part of this lecture. So, participation observation. is actually you visit to a particular official premises and you observe how the relevant people who are directly associated with your concerned operations are functioning. An example, if you have determined to interview HR personnel at a bank, better visit them in an official day after getting the required permission and observe how they are working, how they are interacting with the computer systems. That notion of information capturing is extremely valid, and while you are observing their behaviors you can jot down the relevant points. So that is very important, and those facts that you have collected can be embedded to the prototype increment that you are proposing. Now there are certain principles associated with participation observation. So among those, the first one is what people do and how do they do it. Yeah, that is the point which I raised a few seconds back. If you go to the HR division of the bank, or if you go to the pawning division of the bank, you can see how the officers in those sections are liaising with the computational interfaces which is being provided for them, and how much of time they are taking to process a particular customer's requests, and how much moving and running here and there they have to do to complete one customer's request, difficulties they face, the stress factor, all those things can be analyzed visually, and maybe during their lunch hours or their break times, as the HCI designer you can speak with them to get relevant information. So all these aspects that you are extracting need to be recorded, jotted down, and that has to be embedded in the prototype increment that you are suggesting in the next iteration. The next important aspect is the values and goals of the people. Now any individual is belonging to a particular ethnographic context or socio-economical context, and they have their own beliefs, rituals, faiths. So those are strong triggering or governing points which controls an individual's behavior. So those aspects also has to be considered. I think I explained about this in detail in one of my previous lecture. Certain people they might not like to have certain wordings or certain symbols where they might consider those things as offensive. Then colors which has been utilized in the interfaces, then font sizes, font styles, religious perspectives, all those things matter. Now say for an example, in Fridays mostly the Muslim people, they need to go to the mosque, so they have to complete their official task a little bit in advance. So maybe more convenient or more automated version or more facilitated version of the interface is available for them on Fridays, for an example, right? So likewise those interaction problems has to be considered a lot. Then the next important thing is how particular activities link with the large ecology. Now say for an example, you are interviewing or you are observing the behavior of a HR officer in a bank. You should not be limiting your observation only to the HR perspective, because this HR division is running inside the bank as a subset, so which has to contribute to its overall or the high level atmosphere or the ecological setting which is the bank as a one whole unit. Therefore the designer should understand the niche operation and how this specific niche operation is linked and contributing towards the overall operations and other related aspects. In other words, the HCI designer should get the complete big picture. Then only he or she can reach to rational decisions. Then next point, what are the similarities and differences of people? As individual, none of us are identical. We are different from each one to another. So our thinking patterns are different. Our perspectives are different, and we might look at the same problem with multiple perspectives. As I mentioned earlier also,
There could be young people, elderly people, and their eyesight might be good or eyesight might be weak. Accordingly, they might need interfaces with large fonts or small fonts, etc. Or there could be differently abled people, say for an example a blind person. So there has to be a braille interface assistance available for that sort of an employee. Likewise, all related aspects associated with the business of concern has to be considered. All the relevant individuals contributing to fulfill the activities of the business of concern has to be considered, and accordingly the interaction assistance has to be customized. Last one, what are the context and types people are interacting with? So subsection coming under this is apprentice model. So this has been properly elaborated with the case study of Jack Verlan and copy unit case study. So where the case study is about a photocopy repair center. So the most talented and the experienced person working at the so-called photocopy repair center is the person who has stayed there continuously for the longest time. But the second most talented employee functioning at this photocopy repair center is not the person with the second most longest duration of stay. Then who is that? That is the individual who is seated, right? Who is seated before or who is seated close by the most talented person who is functioning in this photocopy repair center. So we refer this as the apprentice model, right? This apprenticeship model is very important because it is a strong medium of transferring knowledge, intangible knowledge, invisible knowledge, which are not documented in manuals or physically approachable. So while observing how an expert is functioning, lot of inculcative, stimulating viewpoints can be extracted. So during the participation observation concern or approach as well, it is ideal if the HCI scientists who are visiting to the organization, if they can observe maybe for at least for a week how several selected set of experts are functioning. So their interaction experiences can be extracted. How they are tackling the problems can be extracted, and all those valid inputs is extremely vital in configuring the forthcoming iteration of the prototype increment, which is positively boosting for the development of a extremely refined final version of the product. Okay, so during this lecture we discussed about two important aspects. One is the interviewing concept and certain guidelines associated with the interviewing concept, and the second aspect is the participation observation mechanism, where again certain important salient points associated with participation observation. So I would like to thank you very much, and we'll meet again in another fruitful session.